Hi there, this is week 4 assignment 3 feedback for Kirsten, Alicia, Dolly, and Jacqueline. So honestly, I just could not be more impressed with these. Oh, there we go. They're all going in a really great direction. So let's just start with Kirsten's here. First thing I'm going to look at are the harmonies. So complementary looks good, split complementary looks good, and the palette seemed to reflect the correct colors from each wheel. In addition, we have a broad range of those tints, tones, and shades used in the design in order to create a very strong sense of contrast. And we have contrast that's high contrast and low contrast. So we're not just talking about very bright sort of visual vibration type contrast. We're talking about areas of subtlety and areas of pop within the design. So one thing that I want you to think about, Kirsten, is what do you want to be the focal point of this design? The focal point should be the object or the area of the composition that has the most amount of contrast. So the lightest versus the darkest, the brightest versus the dullest. Looking at your design, it feels like we need the focal point to be in the center, although it's not. It is asymmetric, but the axis is, or excuse me, it is symmetric, but the axis is on a diagonal. So the top diagonal is mirroring the bottom diagonal. Roughly, it's approximate symmetry. Because of that type of symmetry, I feel like the focal point should be in the middle of the composition. So I would make that star that is in the center of the composition the brightest red from your palette, or the brightest orange from your palette, so that it has a lot of contrast to the background. So really thinking about contrast and hue, value, and saturation to create a strong focal point. And then the areas that compete with it need to be knocked down in contrast. So right now the stars in the corner are kind of competing for attention. So I would make those have a lower amount of contrast so that the highest contrast is in the focal point alone. Let's go to the next one. All right, Alicia, really great job. Complementary, split complementary are both correct. Your palettes look good. So the same thing that I was mentioning to Kirsten, you want to think about the focal point. And the focal point for me is naturally the very large star in the center. So you want that star to be the brightest, the lightest, and have the most contrast to the area around it in order for it to be a really strong focal point. So rather than the most amount of contrast existing in the corners, I would recommend putting it in the center of your design so that becomes a very strong focal area of your composition. Let's see, Dolly, complementary looks good, split complementary looks fantastic, design looks good, we have really high areas, we have areas of high and low contrast. Same thing that I was mentioning to your classmates, you want to think about establishing a focal point and utilizing very bright, warm colors in that focal point, very light, bright colors in that focal point that have a lot of contrast to the area that's around it. So tweaking your design just a bit so that you find that focal point and make it obviously the focal point of your composition through contrast and hue, value, and saturation. Jacqueline, another really great design. Same recommendation to you. One of these stars feels like it needs to be the focal point, and I would make it slightly different than the other one. So not just a focal point that has the most amount of contrast, but also slightly different. For me, it feels like it needs to be the middle bottom composition, or excuse me, the middle bottom star. I would make it larger. I'd make it have more points, and then also have the highest amount of contrast, be the lightest, the brightest, the warmest, the most saturated color from your palette.